Okay. I don't know. I'm gonna stream for like 15 minutes. This is more like a test stream. Um, but I'm hoping this is gonna be the first version part of what will be known as my Anim Journal series. So let me give you a brief breakdown. Uh, I am trying to pour everything that I know about animation in terms of like 2D hand-drawn animation into a series of YouTube streams, just dumping it off the dome almost. I'll do a little prep, but mostly off the dome, and trying to just get it all down in one spot so I can help other people do animation. I really love to animate. I love to storyboard. That's kind of the jam. And right now I'm just trying to get it all out. And then eventually, once I've kind of gotten the basics out into my channel, what I will do is start covering different software and like more specific things that you can do to speed things up. But like what I'm going to talk about is like the OG, everybody should know this stuff at some point, or try this stuff so that they can understand why maybe certain tools operate the same way, why certain tools make things easier for you to do these things. And just to show that like it's not crazy hard. Like if you think about, you know, animation and levels, like you think about starting simple when you're learning something and then building on top of that and building on top of that and building on top of that until you're at an advanced level. I think that anybody can really learn animation and it can really benefit sort of, even for folks that have done this for a long time, like it benefits you to try to think in a more modular way about animation. So I'm going to try to cover some of the ways that I think about certain things and how they can be constructed in like a structural manner versus just intuition, which I think most of us who do animation we all tend to have started or maybe even still operate from just pure intuition. And then we refine that with certain like tricks and, you know, tricks of the trade that we kind of build in, you know, as we do projects, as we work for other companies, things like that. So that's kind of what I'm going to talk about for the most part on these Anim journals. Sometimes I'm not going to be talking. Sometimes I'm just going to be like, hey, yo, I'm here drawing real quietly and we're vibing to music, and that's okay. You know, that most of the job is sitting quietly trying to, you know, brute force get it out of your system, you know, right? So yeah, I think it'll be a good time. There's a lot to cover. I think of what I'm actually going to cover. Where did I put that thing? Yeah, okay, so what I'm going to cover is pretty much ball bounce, right? Because everybody, ball bounces are the most like obvious. It's the most obvious thing to cover. We'll do a leaf fall. We'll talk about the elements. So, you know, fire, water, lightning, smoke, rubble, or rock, and yeah, like any kind of other mineral, elemental type thing. We'll talk a little bit about thumbnailing and storyboarding and character design, how it kind of affects what you do in terms of animation. Talk about character movement and just like anticipation, things like that. Then we'll talk about kind of what locomotion, character locomotion, so like moving, running, jumping, walking, crawling, tumbling, things like that. Face acting, animation, like you know, animating to dialogue, but also like emoting with your face. which I think is a lot of fun. Let's see what else I got here. I might start talking about some experimental work because I tend to do a little bit of like a mixed media approach to my work. Like sometimes I'll take like paint on glass concepts and try to digitally recreate those. So like things like that. Talk about texture and abstraction and tension and counterpoint, sort of like more of sort of the conceptual ideas that show up in your animation, and then talk about just process and how your approach to process can influence how your animation is then expressed and how expressive it can be, based on how you plot your approach. So yeah, those are like topics that I will touch on as I just do things, but for the most part it's gonna be a lot of like off the dome vomit, but within the realm of those specific categories. Okay, so let's jump a little bit into like one of them, for example. All right, so I'm gonna play something for you. So we talked about bouncing ball, right? It's kind of like the first thing every animator does. And I'm going to talk about it here too. A little bit. Let me just adjust the timeline so it's there. Yeah, so yeah, nothing too crazy. It's ball bounce, mostly on twos. There's some ones here and there. For the most part, it's just your everyday average bouncing ball. And also, let me hide this crosshair. So you don't need that right now. The basic ball bounce is this. Right? And so it's losing energy as it goes. I'm not showing the full bounce until stop. It's a good exercise to do the full bounce until stop, but I just kind of wanted to illustrate. This is a ball bounce, and this is very fast to put together, right? Like, especially digitally. Like if you're doing this on paper, different story. It would still be fast, but it would be different. But what I started with, just to give you a sense, it started out with blank. I drew a floor plane, right? You want to know where your ball is bouncing. So you need a plane in order to do that. Right now, we're doing just a pure profile bounce. So we're not seeing anything in the z-axis, like, closer or further away from camera. And so I just drew a flat line, and that was my floor. I drew a little wall with a little thing just to show like the ball kind of like falling off of something. And then the second thing I did was I drew the motion path. And there's a couple thoughts here about the motion path that I kind of want to talk about real quick. So the first thing, that I wanted to talk about is, since I have it up here, so you'll notice these notch marks here, right? These notch marks here. So the idea for that is we're talking about the force of gravity, and usually when something falls, it'll increase speed until it hits that maximum velocity rate. That's the same rate for everything on the planet. And what the bounce is energy is being exerted from the ball in the opposite direction of gravity, and it loses energy over time until gravity takes over, and then it starts to fall until it reaches its maximum velocity. That's the idea. So there's the ball, we go from here, right? There's an energy that kicks it forward, and then gravity's picking it up and dropping it down, right? It's picking it up and dropping it down. And the wall, or the floor is an immovable object. And so the energy that it's picking up, or the energy that it will have, is what makes it squash, right? Because none of that motion energy is being transferred and pushing the floor down, right? So because it's the floor's not moving. You could make a moving floor. That makes this whole thing more complicated. But for the most part, that's what you're experiencing. So then the energy gets carried on in the ball and it goes back up. Along the way, it's lost some of its force due to like friction, air, all kinds of stuff, right? So it loses energy, so it doesn't bounce as high. But this is, the energy that's from the viscosity or the buoyancy or like the bounciness of the ball, after being hit, kind of carrying through. That's what makes it go up again. Then gravity takes over. Then, impact, carry through, fall again, right? That's what's happening. So another thing, so as it's going up, it's losing speed, right? Because it's being taken over by gravity. That's what creates this kind of like floating kind of feeling at the top. It's the point in which the carried through energy is kind of like similar, and it still has its forward path that it's moving in, but that's what creates the curvature at the top, the kind of hold at top. That's why bounces aren't triangles, right? Because of the rate of speed and how it matches up with the energy, which I know sounds a little complicated, but that's how I understand it. So, what I'm trying to figure for is like, okay, this is the starting point. Gravity's taking over. It's slowly moving faster until it hits the ground. And so that's how I devise these notches. If you were to look at like any animation in Animated Survival Kit, Guide, the Presto Magic, any of them, they talk about the ball bounce. They'll tell you it's like 12 drawings from bounce to bounce or something like that, and you're dividing it in half. But like the position of where the ball is before it hits the ground is really important for believability. You want, after it bounces back up, it's kind of moving a little faster than when it hits the ground, it's a little lower. You just want to create some more believability. So that's why these items are not, level to each other, right? So that's all that. There's all that. There's another thing called maintaining volumes in a ball bounce. So like, as to sell it, the ball might stretch a little bit before it hits the ground, right? And that's just purely because you want to make the impact be felt in animation. Remember, this is not a real ball bouncing. This is the simulation of that. And so, you want to sell it a little more so you get a little stretch. And, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can do a stretch, or you could do like a blur. Similar game. But squash and stretch is what is at play with a ball bounce, right? Balls are kind of squishy and malleable. So depending on the weight of the ball, it might have a little stretch to it as it picks up speed going towards the ground. When it hits the ground, that because of the how bouncy or flexible that ball is, you're gonna have that ball distribute out as it flattens. And that's called maintaining volume, because if you don't maintain volume, so say you have a regular circle here, this stretched out ball, it still feels like this is roughly the same, like if it was filled with water, it has the same amount of water in it, if you could think of it like that. It has the same volume. So you want your ball at the bottom to feel the same way. Now, if you were to look at a real ball hitting the floor, you might, depending on what type of ball it is, you might see a couple different things. If it's something like a tennis ball that's filled with air, it'll be an oblong shape, right? But if it's like a beach ball, it actually can get flat like that, which is weird, I know. But if you watch the video, it's true. it's just all about like how what the surface of it is versus what it's filled with, and how malleable the inside of the ball is, all this stuff. Which is why I think it's really great to study a ball bounce, because you can create all different kinds of ball bounce. If this was a bowling ball, it wouldn't bend at all, right? It would just be the same shape all the way through because it's so solid. It's not affected by, it's so solid on the inside of the ball, it's not affected by any sort of outside external forces other than gravity. There isn't like a distribution of weight or a shifting of weight because the inside is filled with air or water, is a sponge that has air in pockets in it or anything like that. So those are all the things you think about when you think about ball bounce, right? And so, I talked about the notches, kind of the transfer energy, and so that's kind of where I landed. I did this ball, which is more like a handball or like a spongy ball, right? If I was to scrub through it, you see it kind of stretches at the end and bounces, rounds out again, stretches right before the end, boom, sell it, and there you go, right? And I actually have I think I have a couple more. Yeah, see, yeah, boom, boom, right. So that's how the ball bounce would go. And I think everyone's like, oh, ball bounce is so boring. Like, who cares, right? But I think ball bounce you can make very interesting if you just add one more thing to it, right? And it'd be a different topic. And I think this is true of all things. Like, if you add another topic, like another item to the ball, suddenly this exercise becomes super difficult, right? Like, it becomes like really high level. So, yeah, what I did to make it harder was to add fire to the equation. Now, I'll play this for you, but I want to have a conversation about how fire works a little bit. And I'm not going to go through the whole fire thing because there's a couple different ways to talk about this. But yeah, you see, I have a little flaming ball. Boom. See, at the transfer of energy, because the flame is kind of like an element attached to the ball. As it spreads out on the floor, it pushes all the flames out like a burst. And that was a thought I had. And then it would kind of like build its flame up again as more air catches on, right? Since the ball is the emitter of the flame. And then, yeah, it would just keep bouncing like that, And I didn't even finish the animation here, right? But that's the idea is, okay, but there's a couple things happening here that you should probably consider that I haven't even talked about yet, right? But there's this idea of drag. There's this idea of, how do things pull off the body when the motion is being driven by an object, right? Because the fire is not the element itself. The ball is the source of the fire. And so the fire is following along with that. But, it's not going to follow along neatly, right? It has its own like fire has its own properties. And as an emitter, it has to constantly kind of keep trying to emit the flame and rebuild the flame. So let's talk about fire just a little bit. And this is not the best example. I'm probably gonna do another example for y'all at some point. Let's go over here for a second. Okay. You see a lot of complicated things, so I'm gonna hide everything first. We're gonna talk about it. Okay. So if you were like in 3D software or 2D software, you might run into something like this where it's like a little guide. You have here, it's not a little drawing layer. I lost it. Let me make a new one. It's fine up there. Whatever, it's fine. Alright, so you'll have like, that's the ball, right? Like, let's say we weren't bouncing the ball. The ball's just still. This is the ball. This is the source, right? And when you're dealing with elements, that's mostly how you talk about it. Like, this is the source of your element. This is the generation path. So for flame, there are different shapes you can use, but you can pretty much use any shape you want, if you really want to. As long as you make a system for your flame, you can get the flames to work, but there's really one important thing. So this is sort of the path. This is the path. These are the paths. So I think of these as like hairs. And sometimes in 3D software, that's what it is. It's like a hair. But if the ball had one hair, one straight hair, and your flame would have to follow this hair, right? And your flame would, you know? And the thing about it is, if you were to do it, let's say you were to wiggle the hair, the flame would have to respond accordingly, right? Just to illustrate the point, right? So it would do something like that. That's an easy way to think about it, but there's a couple other properties of fire that are important. So there's sort of like a decay that happens. So like, let's say these are the bounds. It's probably not the official term, but that's what I'm gonna call it. So like, flames are not gonna jump out here like that. It's not what we're doing. You know, it's generally gonna follow this path. So then flames, if you look at flames, they might start out big, right? And then they get smaller over time, right? That change is called the decay. And it is over time, you know, and distance. So like as it gets closer to the bounds, to the edges, it may decay. So you could have things decay this way too, you know, to the left and right. But usually with flames, they go up. So this decay is what you really are concerned about. Okay. So let me just get rid of all this real quick. Now, a lot of elements will follow like a sine wave. There's sort of like a motion, a kind of generative motion. It's kind of repetitive. So I'm gonna draw a real quick example of what that would be. Let's say your flame shape is like this. This is your example flame, right? You know, this part here is one part of a sine wave, and then this part is another, right? This, you can tell these properties are different. Like it's like, oh, more to the right, and then this is more to the left. And you can see this is more left again up here, this section. Right? So this kind of undulation back and forth, you can create a graph. You can create a graph for this. There's a way, and this is how software tends to generate these things for you. So, and this is stuff you won't see necessarily. So if your shape of your flame is like this, right? So you could create an orb and let's say a half circle like this. You create an orb and then you create a convex like this. Or you can make it two balls even, right? Let's give it some room, right? Because sometimes flames are skinny, right? Give it some room. Maybe shrink it down. This could be your pattern. So I'm gonna copy this a couple times. You could even vary it, like maybe, so for example, maybe there's 2 circles here, so it's like the flame got weak for a second. Right, you could vary it. You can have 2 stack up here. Mind you, this is just a guide. This is not the flame itself. But I'm gonna show you in a second kind of what you could do here with this. Okay, so I'm gonna, in black, I'm gonna make a new layer. See if I can get this to move. Okay. Let's see, keyframe. Maybe, so that's the top of the flame, right? Boom. So that's the keyframe, and move it up here like this. All right, and as you can see, it's keyframed. It moved. It doesn't move straight, but that's okay. I'm just trying to explain something real quick. It doesn't matter. Okay, so that's the movement, right? So let me throw another layer on. Yeah. And so I'm gonna lower the opacity of this one. This is just a guide. It's not a real thing. You know? We have the movement, and I'm gonna hand animate flames because usually, just to give you some background, usually effects animation is just hand drawn frame by frame, right? But when you have a system like this, you have something to work from. It makes it faster. So let's say I'm gonna say the first flame. Let's say I'm trying to do just the idea of shape. You know, maybe that shape is my flame, or that shape is my flame, or this shape is my flame. That's kind of the idea. So you can literally just draw around, right? And this is the, remember that you have your emitter right there, so you don't have to go further down. And you're kind of just following the shape. Right, so that's one. It's moved up. The thing is, drawing it every frame gives it a little bit of variety. You can also make decisions about how you want this to feel, right? Like, it doesn't have to follow the guide perfectly. The guide is just there to kind of help you set a tone, right? But at the end of the day, all that's really happening is you're just trying to find a way to communicate that this is a flame that's moving up, right? I don't need this part. And this is where it gets interesting, right? Because, there's a decay. Remember I was telling you about the decay? Well, as it reaches the top, it's supposed to like change, right? So we're gonna go back around once I have a couple frames, right? And we're gonna fill in certain spots so it feels like there's a decay at the end of it, you know? And then I'll show you something else that will help with this as well. So that's a little more software specific, but still. All right. Let's keep going. Yeah, it takes time. But I can even have it so that it kind of rotates around a little. There you go. See? Big deal. Right? Boom. So yeah, there's kind of this upward movement, right? That follows that. And as you can see, I could, just to improve, right? Have it like it's coming off of it's here. As if they're hot coals that are leaving the flame, you know? Leaving the flame, which just sounds weird, but it's true. And it creates more of a flicker. Right. So just gonna move this here for a second. Right, that's really fast. Oh no, we don't want it to go that fast, right? I'm just gonna grab this, put this over. Okay, that got done, right? So I stretched out to double to half of that. And then just gonna quickly, there's a quick way to do it, but it's easier to do it this way. All right. Okay. And then there you go. It's on twos. Look at that. Flame. If I were to hide it, it already feels like a flame already, right? But there's more you can do with it, obviously. So, for example, and this is where it gets interesting. So now you're going to be looking at what each frame is doing and adding, right? So like you can add little flames, but then you got to carry it through. Right? And if you want to loop, you can have that. See? Now it's, you got something looping when you connect drawings from the end to the end of the cycle to the beginning of the cycle. But you can have this kind of stick out like that, right? Right? You can have that stick out. Oh, look, it generated a flame. And you can move this up some. Squeeze it down. Now this is what's called straight ahead. You're looking at the drawings and you're just trying to make sure that they're all connected. When you're doing the guides and stuff, that's more of a pose to pose because you have an understanding of what the beginning and the end is already, which is a good thing, right? So see here, I have the flame stick out some, so maybe after that, it bursts a little. I can set this up, You can have this be more of like a right, it's building the flame up and then spits the flame out. I can fix this a little. I can look at this and say, hey, you know what? What if it disconnected? You can add a couple in the top, right? Almost like it birthed two flames, right? Two ending decaying flames. These are what I would call these embers, right? See? And now you're sort of getting like a nice flicker. There's some carry through, there's some extra bits and bobbles. It feels more like fire, right? You might not like some certain spots, like here, maybe this still needs like a little flicker that's further up. And then, you know, maybe this one has a little flicker as well. Yeah. Maybe this one needs to get a little fatter, right? These are the choices you make as a creative, and I feel like there's an upward motion for it. And this would be the outer flame, right? So there's always like a sine wave to a flame, I think. Even if you look at like a flamethrower, it's still a sine wave because there's force exerted from the spray. And then with this, you know, like let's say, you know, you wanted to, you know, keep going with this. And mind you, this is all rough. You would do a cleanup version of all this at some point, right? You might, you know, just go ahead and make that little centerpiece, right? Minding the fact that you have a guide. So you might have that little centerpiece. Maybe there's a little flame up there. Right? And then you're just paying attention to see how things move. You know, you want to make sure your centers line up. Maybe this is not. See, that feels right. So you're looking and you're like, oh, it's shrunk up. It's skinny. Maybe there's like a little.
Jó van, hát még nem reppelek. Mert én ide csak nyaralni jöttem. Azt hittem, hogy itt kapok kaviárt, meg minden, az sehol semmi. Bah. Ekkora sorba.
Get even small and go up there. Yeah. Right? This is kind of, it's time consuming, right? It's not like, oh, press fire, press generate fire. It's not that. But yeah, I think that this is the kind of thing that it's the type of thing that, you know, makes for good custom, you know, fire. That's how you make fire, right? And I would finish this out obviously, but this is only, I'm only showing you this to make the point of how I did the fire with the bouncing ball. So I'll wrap this up real quick by saying, just to put it back out, not these two. Let's see. So the bouncing ball, if that's how fire works, you know, I'm by hand. I didn't even do a guide for it, but by hand, I am you can kind of see them taking into account not a steady motion, but a motion of going one direction and dragging those plumes of flame back as speed increases. And as things slow down, I'm steadying the flame while keeping in mind that there's kind of a constant sine wave motion going upwards because it's burning oxygen. Um, so it'll, the flame will follow the motion, and then as things get slower, it'll take over with a sine wave kind of burning, like how I showed in the previous example. So that's the idea there. So that's how you make a ball bounce more advanced. And you can do this with all elements. So you could have the ball be followed up by some other rubble, and so you're seeing it like lose bits of rubble as it hits the ground. Um, of course, the bounce would be different too, right? So you would have to do that as well. You could take the idea of the bowling ball and imagine if that ball was being chipped away every time it hit the ground, and then that makes it much harder, more advanced bouncing ball situation. All right, but yeah, that's the idea. Um, that's my first Anim journal. I'm gonna come up with some more, obviously. Um, but I think this is kind of like a first thing to do. Like if you're just starting to do animation, do your bouncing ball. There's also another way to make this more advanced too, which I'm kind of showing here already, is to try to calculate the rotation of the ball, which, let's say if this ball was, emitting water, that rotation would be very interesting because now it's got a spin and there's a splatter. But we'll talk about that another time. um, with that said, I'm gonna go. This is fun. I'll probably do this again pretty soon. I'm still coming up with like schedule and stuff, but yeah, I'm super excited to kind of just brain dump all of my stuff into YouTube if I can. All right. And again, I guess, like the YouTube people say, like and subscribe if you want to, follow me along on this journey. All right.